Our climate is changing, and it's having an extreme effect on our weather.
It is the wettest in 132 years. You got to go back to 1884.
15 inches of rain the first 2 weeks of June, and then just 4 years later, we had the worst drought that we've had in, over 25 years.
It's been a warm year, one of the record warmest years out there.
The last 40 years has been the warmest 40-year period over the last 1,500 years.
In Madison today, the high was 68 degrees. That's the warmest February day ever.
Winter is getting shorter. Winter is being squeezed.
Our climate is changing, and it's affecting you in ways you might not realize. Whether it's higher insurance rates, roads that are filled with water more than snow, or fewer trout in your favorite fishing stream.
Brook trout, which is really a favorite native species, will be totally eliminated.
I'm afraid to say that we might not know the full effects until it actually starts to happen.
Our climate is changing, and it's forcing cities and companies in Wisconsin to adapt, spending billions of dollars to deal with storms, droughts, floods, and their consequences.
We had quite a few basements that flooded out. There's no system that can handle 7 inches in 4 hours.
We just keep telling ourselves it's going to be drier next year, and we'll make up lost ground then.
Our climate is changing, and it's affecting our public discourse, from coffee shops to the nation's capital, to the point that there are now key leaders following the 3% of the world's scientists who insist climate change and its human causes are not a problem.
I remember being told that we would no longer refer to it as climate change or global warming.
It's clear that Wisconsin is pulling back from its heritage of caring about the land and the environment.
There is absolutely no serious scientific disagreement that humans are responsible for the climate change that we're seeing now. But there's huge uncertainty over what you do about it, right? This has never happened to our species.
Our climate is changing, and it's affecting our lives right now. In the next hour, we'll see how, explain why, and examine what, if anything, we can do about it. This is Our Wisconsin, the Climate Change Effect. I'm Greg Jeske. Well, of course, our climate is changing, right? I mean, rarely is it the same from one day to the next. First, we need to make sure we're talking about the same thing here, because climate and weather are two different things. Weather is what's happening right now, but climate is what happens over the long term. Documented changes like a higher average temperature. And second, we want to be clear from the start that this is not going to be a debate about the science of climate change. We accept the conclusion of the 97% of climate experts who say the climate is changing more rapidly because of humans. However, we are going to look at the effect climate change is having on our public discourse. The science of climate change dates back to when humans began heavily polluting the air during the first industrial revolution.
Our understanding of climate change goes all the way back to the 1800s, where our knowledge of the impact of carbon dioxide on the radiative balance of our Earth was identified. And even in the early 1900s, there were newspaper articles. So I think I saw one from 1912 or something that said, we're burning all of this coal right now in our furnaces, and one of these days that may cause a warming of the temperature.
Those researchers were remarkable in their thinking, because the magnitude of change that they projected, given a certain increase in CO2, pretty much matched what has happened. And I think that's perspective that's often lost, is that this isn't something that we just all of a sudden found out, around 1950 or 60.
In the 1990s, we were introduced to global warming. The term described the result of the greenhouse effect, as gases like carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, and methane formed a blanket over the Earth's atmosphere, trapping heat and causing temperatures to rise. Burning fossil fuels like oil and coal puts more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere and makes that greenhouse blanket thicker, making the Earth warmer. It's the biggest human impact on climate change. In Wisconsin, we generate more methane gas too because of the dairy farms. And if the temperature trends continue, it's predicted that Wisconsin will resemble Missouri in the next 30 years.
If I wanted Missouri weather, I'd go live in Missouri. I don't want Missouri weather. I'd like Wisconsin to stay the way it is.
But scientists say a lot would need to happen in a short amount of time to keep Wisconsin the way it is right now.
More than 200 of them, experts in all fields of science, collaborated on a first-of-its-kind report, Wisconsin's Changing Climate Impacts and Adaptation. The Wisconsin Initiative on Climate Change Impacts, or WICI, published that 2011 report, which described the changes and impacts that have already been documented, projections for the future, and plans of action to address the issues caused by climate change in our state.
It was the first report of its kind in the country. This is what the future world is going to look like, and here are some things we can do to prepare and prosper in a changing climate.
Extreme weather events like the devastating floods in Wisconsin in 2000, 2008, 10, 16, and 17 are fast becoming the signature feature of climate change. But the 2011 WICI report also found several serious threats that have been growing over the years.
Nature wants to take thousands of years to evolve, time through natural selection and evolution to change things. And we're pushing, we're stressing by changing the climate. We're asking nature to adapt at a pace that nature was never made to adapt at.
Animals like the snowshoe hare and grouse, fish like the walleye and trout, trees like birch and black spruce, they're all being watched very closely by scientists right now to see how and if they can adapt to Wisconsin's warmer, wetter climate. For humans, it's not just a matter of adapting, it's a matter of taking decisive action while there's still time.
I think when we start thinking about sort of what the impact is on future generations, our children and our grandchildren, that's really where the conversation needs to go. That what we make in terms of decisions now will impact those future generations.
I think one of the things that's ironic about it is that many people are adapting even when they say that they maybe don't believe in it or they don't think humans are causing it.
And that decisive action starts at home. Next, we dig deeper into what the climate change effect is doing to our weather, our wildlife, and our water. In the big picture view of climate change, it's easy to see how an effect on one aspect of our planet can quickly affect many others. Take water, for example. It covers most of the planet. We need it to survive, and yet it's also a threat in the world of human-accelerated climate change, not only in the form of rising oceans, but from what's falling from the sky.
We've had an increase in severe weather events, including heavy downpours in Wisconsin.
Now, scientists are quick to point out they can't guarantee climate change is responsible for any individual storm, but when they look at the trends over the years, they can and do draw that conclusion.
We have increasing precipitation here in the south. We have more bigger storms. Something like 3/4 of Madison's large storms have occurred since 2000.
In fact, records show Madison has had nearly as many heavy rainfall events in the past decade as the 5 previous decades combined. And 6 of the 7 wettest years on record have happened in the past 25 years. We can expect more of those big storms in the years ahead, too. The WICI climate models project a 25% increase in heavy rainfall events, 2 inches or more in 24 hours. But Wisconsin appears to be on the edge of a climate change boundary, with the northern part of the state going through a somewhat different experience than the south. Instead of more precipitation across the board, weather patterns have put the north in a drought cycle roughly every 10 years.
We're seeing deeper and longer droughts in the north. The most recent one was about 2006 to 2013. The lake levels all drop and things change pretty dramatically, and that pattern seems to be intensifying.
Comparing north and south, records from 1950 to 2006 show summertime precipitation decreased by 2 to 4 inches in northern Wisconsin and increased about the same amount in the south. The scientists say that their climate models show a 75% probability that Wisconsin as a whole will have more annual precipitation, mainly during the winter and spring, and more of it will fall as rain instead of snow. In fact, they predict the state's annual average snowfall by the year 2050 will be 14 inches less than it is today.
We have 3 different greenhouses that are set up to simulate future conditions for Wisconsin winters.
As fierce as nature can be, it's also very fragile, and one seemingly small change can have huge consequences. Which is why UW researchers are studying how climate change is affecting life at ground zero, the thin layer between the snow and the soil, called the subniveum.
What we're seeing, though, is that this climate change effect on snow conditions is actually creating a colder and more variable snow-soil interface. But now that those temperatures are getting colder and warmer and they're jumping around on a daily basis more frequently, we see that stable thermal refuge is now kind of collapsing around them.
So there are species that are like wood frogs and some amphibians that actually really do require those temperatures, those stable temperatures to get through the winter. And there are species like even grouse that a lot of people sort of enjoy that actually use below the snow sort of environments in order to kind of get through winter, the harsh winter weather.
When they're actually in snow burrows, you can get really close to them.
Grouse are a popular game bird in Wisconsin, but they may not be around much longer with less snow for them to use as protection against predators and cold.
Last year we only had about a week that snow conditions were suitable for burrowing, and pretty similar this year as well. And so we've actually been doing some research that shows that grouse are actually more stressed at really cold temperatures when they can't find a snow burrow to burrow into.
A lack of snow is also hurting the snowshoe hare in Wisconsin. The animal's fur coat turns white in the winter regardless of snow cover. Now that gives them perfect camouflage against predators in the snow, but makes them easy targets when that white coat stands out against a brown, snowless background.
Wisconsin is not getting as cold as it used to get. And that's the huge change that we're seeing in Wisconsin right now.
Scientists project that Wisconsin's annual average temperature will rise between 4 and 9 degrees by mid-century. Since 1950, the state's average temperature has gone up by 1.1 degrees, but that relatively small number is misleading, because in that same time period there were 5 fewer days with a low temperature below zero in southern Wisconsin, and 14 to 20 fewer of those frigid days in the northwest central part of the state. People who ice fish were among the first to notice.
Back in the 1880s, there was an average of 4 or over months of ice fishing on the Madison Lakes. It's down to about 2.5 months instead of 4 months.
In fact, records show Madison's Lake Mendota has lost 19 days of ice cover every 100 years since the year 1850. And it's not just ice fishing that's being affected by the warmer temps.
The walleye, Wisconsin's favorite sport fish, is a fish that has and is and will continue to be impacted by a changing climate.
What did the climate change to make it worse for the walleye?
Ice cover is decreasing on our lakes. Lakes are becoming warmer.
The warmer the water, the less oxygen it holds. And if you're a fish, you need oxygen to live.
There are also fewer days of ice cover on the Great Lakes. During the winter of 2016-17, ice cover on Lake Superior was so minimal that the Madeline Island Ferry was able to keep running all winter. Only the 4th time in 160 years that that's happened, but the last 3 of those have happened over the past 6 winters. And less ice cover on the Great Lakes also leads to more evaporation, which causes lower lake levels, which hurts the shipping and cold water fishing industries. And it's not just lakes where fish may struggle. Wisconsin's rivers and streams are warming too.
Brook trout, which is really a favorite native species, will be totally eliminated because of they need the best in the coldest water.
And what little cold water habitat the trout have left is threatened by damaging runoff from those more intense storms. Climate change has left some species hanging on for dear life.
The kinds of birds people would see at the bird feeders, some of the siskins and the warblers and the finches, are going to be the ones that they're normally seeing, are going to be the ones that they don't see anymore.
They can adapt or they can go extinct.
Plants are also having to adjust to climate change, and like animals, not all of them are expected to make it in a warmer, wetter Wisconsin.
That may change the composition of tree species in the state. This is probably going to have the biggest effects in northern Wisconsin.
The white birch is one of those tree species that will likely disappear in the next 100 years. They're a species that likes a little bit cooler than the climate's going to be.
Climate change isn't a death knell for everything. Plants and animals that are better adapted to a warmer environment have already started showing up in Wisconsin. Milder winters get the credit for boosting the white-tailed deer population in the north. But the benefits of a warming climate come with a warning.
One thing we may see as a result of fewer really cold days is more invasive species, more pests, more bugs, for example.
In fact, there have been recent discoveries in Wisconsin of the Lone Star tick, usually from Texas, and the Asian tiger mosquito, which can carry the Zika virus, both insects formerly believed to be too averse to the cold to come here. And let's not leave out humans. Scientists say the warmer, more volatile climate threatens people with everything from injuries in severe weather to heat-related illnesses to diseases from some of the insects we just mentioned.
We reach in the environment, and we call it tipping points, where something can be very successful and is a dominant predator, like the walleye has been in northern Wisconsin for virtually thousands of years. It's been the dominant predator in our northern lakes, and slowly over time that was beginning to change, and it changed rapidly here in the last 60 years.
And scientists say the changes are happening so rapidly because of humans. The trend of more extreme rainstorms has created a severe level of erosion and pollution runoff into Wisconsin's waterways. The main culprit, phosphorus, from leaves, fertilizer, and manure, which feeds a toxic blue-green algae that grows in the lakes.
Back on the 16th of June, not that long ago, we had one of the biggest blooms I've ever seen on Lake Mendota. The entire surface of the lake looked like it was painted teal blue. Fish were dying in the shallow water all around the lake. Ducks were dying because they were getting the toxins.
Are we going to see more of these?
Yes, we absolutely will.
And UW Limnology Center Director Steve Carpenter says the problem would be even worse if not for the effort and money invested in things like manure digesters and public education in Dane County. But that doesn't mean any progress has been made.
I think that's a really striking impact. Here in the Madison area, we've spent tens of millions of dollars to control phosphorus, and the data shows zero net progress. And the reason is that the precip has gotten more intense.
One of the state's most at-risk areas of water from phosphorus runoff is Green Bay. Because it's fed by the Fox River and many smaller tributaries that flow from farmland, scientists say the water in Green Bay is ripe for those toxic algae blooms. Now, farms are in a unique, if precarious, position when it comes to climate change in Wisconsin. Next, how the dairyland is being damaged and doing damage made worse by the climate change effect. Wisconsin farmers have always been at the mercy of nature, but now that nature has become more merciless with climate change, they're facing more volatile, damaging weather. Scientists are projecting 1 to 4 more weeks each year with daily high temperatures above 90 degrees, which raises concern about drought, especially in areas like the Central Sands, where deep, high-capacity irrigation wells have already caused the groundwater levels to drop substantially. 2012 was a severe drought year in southern Wisconsin. Another problem with the warmer, earlier Wisconsin spring is the high likelihood of a killing frost after the plants have already blossomed. It's a serious threat to Wisconsin's specialty crops like apples, grapes, and cherries. But it's the state's nation-leading cranberry crop that may be at most risk. Growers need a hard winter ice to drive out onto the bogs and spread sand to help the next crop.
If you don't have ice to drive on, and chilling temperatures, which a lot of these fruit crops need for cold hardening, who knows what, they may not be able to survive, in the long term.
Key parts of the state's $88 billion a year agriculture industry do stand to potentially benefit from one effect of climate change: a longer growing season, especially for corn, soybeans, and alfalfa.
Doing a lot of the hands-on management as well as the bigger picture.
The big picture for St. Croix County dairy owner John Vries includes adjusting to a warmer climate, which gives his crops more time to grow and produce more, but
I also see and experience more pests than what we used to. So long-term, whether we're going to have to use the kind of pesticides that somebody in Missouri did 10 years ago,
Scientists also predict more rain in winter and spring, so farmers might also have a hard time taking advantage of a longer growing season because their fields are too wet to plant earlier. Vries says the last 20 years have also brought a growing trend of warmer nights in the summer, which means the cows can't cool off like they need to, and they produce less milk.
Every year we've had to add more ventilation, more misting systems, those kinds of things, because the cows could not cool down at night like they would have when we first built the dairy.
America's dairyland is famous for its milk cows, but those big bovines put out more than just milk.
I think the big deal is manure, and about half of the phosphorus that comes into this lake is manure.
And the extreme rainstorms that have been increasing in both frequency and intensity are making manure and soil runoff almost unmanageable. According to the 2011 Wiki report, soil erosion in Wisconsin could double by the year 2050 from 1990 rates because of the extreme rain.
And as you get more rain, more of that phosphorus-laden material comes into the lakes and streams, and it leads to algae blooms.
It was a $1 million plus decision.
In 2008, John Vries started running an anaerobic manure digester at his farm in St. Croix County. He milks more than 1,000 cows there in what's called a confined animal feeding operation, or CAFO. These are the operations of most concern when it comes to climate change because they create the most manure and release the most methane gas. The digester takes the methane out and uses it to produce electricity, leaving behind a less damaging fertilizer to put on fields.
We also pump all of our manure through what's called drag hoses and inject directly into the ground, which again sequesters a bunch of carbon and 3 of the other gases that agriculture produces.
While he walks the walk on manure management, Vries also drives the drive on carbon dioxide, getting around his farm in a small hybrid electric car instead of the traditional full-sized farm pickup truck.
Agriculture is important, but it doesn't have to be either or, a win-lose situation. We can have a win-win situation if we sit down and work together.
Former State Senator Dale Schultz led the committee that created the rules for CAFOs in Wisconsin. He also owns a 210-acre farm in Richland County where he is walking the walk when it comes to fighting soil erosion.
My philosophy for farming is farm the best and buffer the rest. And this is a field where the soil is a little thin, so it made some sense to turn it back into prairie.
Besides preventing erosion, Schultz has actually reversed the problem in one area where farming over the years had buried a wetland.
Probably about 2 feet of material, eroded material had to be taken off.
Oh, really?
Moved up the hill, dumped up the hill,
okay.
And that allowed the native seed bed to sort of come back.
So this is what it was originally, you'd say?
Mm-hmm. I would say most of the valley in here look like that.
Wisconsin's towns and cities are also being forced to adapt to the climate change effect.
As cities go through planning processes and increase their focus on sustainability, that bringing that climate lens to the decisions that they're making to make sure that they're keeping climate in mind when they make those choices.
In Milwaukee, climate change made the choice for them.
2008, 2009, 2010, we got hit with these storms, and it was a wake-up call. It slapped us in the face and said, you got to do something.
Urban flooding can create a polluted, dangerous situation with runoff from sewers, streets, and fields all filling the streets and people's homes.
Here on the Great Lakes, it's a whole different mindset because we take our drinking water from the lakes and we put our wastewater back into the lakes.
The Milwaukee Metropolitan Sewerage District, MMSD, has become a national model for dealing with flooding caused by the more extreme storms dropping 5 and 7 inches of rain in a matter of hours.
What we're trying to do is manage water where it falls. So it falls on private property, have a rain barrel to store 55 gallons of that water, have a rain garden to take the water and try to infiltrate that into the groundwater, put in a bioswale along the street as opposed to a pipe, so that you, again, are restoring that natural infrastructure as much as you can.
MMSD's own headquarters is home to a huge roof garden that soaks up rain before it hits the streets. The agency has spent $4 billion over the past 3 decades on stormwater issues, including creation of a deep tunnel system, which can store millions of gallons so it doesn't flow untreated into Lake Michigan. But under Executive Director Kevin Schaefer, Milwaukee is going far beyond stormwater management to address climate change.
So this huge wastewater reclamation facility will be able to run that plant on a normal day without using fossil fuels.
Instead, the water treatment plant is powered by renewable energy, most of it produced by an anaerobic digester that works like the digesters on farms, using human instead of cow waste to generate electricity. Schaefer's goal by the year 2035 is to run the plant completely on renewables, 80% of it produced by the digester. Dane County is also using digesters in farming areas to reduce manure runoff into the lakes. The extreme rain events are causing similar but different problems for other cities and towns in Wisconsin. For example, in 2008, Spring Green and Broadhead found themselves under floodwater that actually came from below, as heavy rain pushed groundwater levels so high it came up through the surface. Flooding that same year ultimately forced the entire town of Gaze Mills to move to higher ground. And in 2016, destructive flooding in northern Wisconsin caused one town, Odana, to become an island as water washed out roads.
A lot of culverts have been getting blown out, and so it's a real problem for townships and counties on how to repair those, and then do they put bigger ones in, you know, and that's of course more costly, the bigger culvert that you have to put in.
Cost is a huge consideration, and next, the complicated expense of the climate change effect. The effects of climate change are in the news more and more.
Here's what's happening right now.
70 degrees in February, the record we smashed today, and the impact this unusually warm stretch is having on local businesses.
The economics of climate change are rather involved. You have the upfront costs like flood damage, insurance rates, and stress on the environment. Then there's the financial impact on industries like agriculture and tourism. And then, and this is where it gets political, you have the cost of converting the entire world from fossil fuels over to energy sources that don't hurt the environment, like wind, the sun, and plants.
Who pays for this monumental change and who stands to make money are considerations many say have become obstacles to climate change action. Those people say there's more to it than money. The future of our planet and future generations hang in the balance. They also insist you can have both a sound economy and a cleaner environment. Milder winters are changing not only the economy, but a way of life in northern Wisconsin. Big tourist draws like snowmobiling, ice fishing, and skiing are shrinking with our warmer winters.
There's just going to be a shorter season for all of those things, and so that means to some extent a way of life is being lost.
Perhaps most notably, the American Birkebeiner, the nation's biggest cross-country ski race in far northern Wisconsin, was canceled in 2017 and 2000 because of a lack of snow. The same problem forced organizers to shorten the race several times in recent years, too. Summer tourism is also being hurt with warmer temperatures that are leaving fewer walleye and trout and taking a toll on what's left.
We found growth rates of fishes that depend on the shallow water declining all around the state.
And tourism is just one Wisconsin industry suffering from the climate change effect. Logging companies are hurt by the wet, soft soil conditions that are in forests during heavy rain years like 2017 and during the warmer winters we've been having. Winter's usually the busy season for loggers because they can run those big machines on the hard, frozen ground without tearing up the forest or getting stuck.
I'd say in the last few years it's been slowly going downhill a little bit, mostly because of the weather and the excessive rain and short winters.
In the historic record, has it been shrinking? And we found that yes, in fact, we've got 2 or 3 weeks less frozen ground per year than we did earlier in the century.
Scientists say Wisconsin's forests are also in danger of losing certain tree types to warmer conditions and to heat stress, disease, and insects that come with climate change. But right now, loggers are just trying to keep their operations above water.
We just keep telling ourselves it's going to be drier next year, and we'll make up lost ground then.
Insurance companies have lost a lot of ground to climate change in recent years as bigger storms bring in bigger numbers of customers with bigger damage claims.
The weather volatility is just causing more claims to be submitted in the industry as a whole, anywhere from 10 to 15% more claims on those property homeowners type claims. more claims that you get, the more it has the potential to impact rate.
In 2013, Madison-based American Family Insurance sent this letter to some of its Madison area customers, notifying them of a significant increase in their premium with the explanation, our climate is changing and that wind and hail claims have exceeded premiums charged in 8 of the past 10 years. Claims have also skyrocketed for flood and crop insurance.
The long-term weather patterns are changing, and we know that they are becoming more extreme when they happen.
And with that in mind, we just need to get to the point where we start building homes and businesses to withstand the forces of nature.
American Family is also working to develop tougher building materials like shingles that can survive hailstorms. They're also recommending that new homes in Wisconsin now be built with hurricane straps, like they do in southern states. Those strips of metal connect the frame to the roof to keep it from blowing off in a storm. Utility companies like farms are both victim and perpetrator of the climate change effect. The increase in stronger storms has meant many more down power lines, whether it's the wind knocking down the poles themselves, like this scene from Iowa County in June of 2017, or knocking the trees into the power lines, which happens often in northern Wisconsin.
Throughout the nation, there's really not any efforts this large in scope. Overall, it'll be about 2,000 miles of cable placed underground.
WPS is spending $400 million over the next 5 years to bury those power lines in northern Wisconsin to protect them from the stronger storms. But utilities are also part of the problem. Their burning of fossil fuels to generate our electricity has been and is a big contributor to the greenhouse effect. Renewable energy like wind, sun, and plants is the solution. Now, Wisconsin had been a leader in moving from fossils to renewables. In 2006, the state set a goal of generating 10% of its electricity from renewable energy by the year 2015 and achieved that goal 2 years early. But since then, Wisconsin government leaders have not raised the bar, and the National Conference of State Legislatures shows we now have one of the lowest renewable energy standards in the country.
The Public Service Commission can dictate rules and regulations or nudge power companies along saying, hey, what can we do to have more renewables in the state of Wisconsin, make it economically viable to produce renewables here in the state of Wisconsin, or energy period in the state of Wisconsin, and create a whole bunch of jobs.
But even with little government support, renewable energy generation in Wisconsin still provides more than twice as many jobs as fossil fuel energy generation. Another irony is that some of the nation's most cutting-edge research into renewable energy is being done here in Wisconsin.
The work in this lab is focused on producing fuels and chemicals that we currently derive from petroleum.
Scientists at the Great Lakes Bioenergy Research Center are looking at ways to use plants we don't eat, like prairie grass and trees, in the same ways we now use oil, refining them into multiple chemicals, including fuel that's cleaner.
The CO2 that's released is still CO2. It's just an issue of, are you recycling CO2 or taking old buried CO2 that's been underground for millions of years and releasing it into the atmosphere.
Experts say the fact that utilities are transitioning on their own to more renewables like biofuel, wind, and solar is evidence of both the environmental and economic benefits. And they say history shows Wisconsin can have a clean environment and a sound economy.
In my career, it was often pointed out that the cost of cleaning up rivers like the Fox River and reducing the pollution, it was just going to cost too many jobs, too many paper mills would close down. 35 years later, none of that's come to fruition, yet the water quality has improved.
If you don't take care of the environment, you stand to lose economically. If a lake dries up in central Wisconsin because we're overpumping the water up there for irrigation, that's going to hurt the economy.
Climate change scientists and their supporters say it's hard to put a dollar figure on the future of the planet. But one thing is certain. It's pay now or pay potentially much more later. Next, the cost of climate change on our public discourse and our attitude towards science. Our climate is changing, and it's having a chilling effect on our public discourse in America. The issue has created a small but organized and well-funded opposition that most experts say simply denies proven science. But with support from some high-level leaders in government, the so-called climate change deniers have changed the debate from science to politics. And now the scientists admit they need to step up and publicly represent their work.
For something that's so obvious to scientists, the Earth is changing, the climate is warming, these are the changes we see coming. It seems like a no-brainer that we should be working real hard on it. But then politics enters, and there's certain people that don't believe that, and it's, you know, the wheels are right now turning in the wrong direction.
Jack Sullivan was the Director of Science Programs at the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources from 2000 to 2015, and he helped build that unit into one of the leading environmental science teams in the world.
Staff were beginning to come to me in the late 1990s talking about, geez, we should be looking and spending a little bit more time understanding how Wisconsin's climate might be changing and how it might be impacting the state's natural resources.
Sullivan and his staff set about studying the effects climate change was having in Wisconsin, and along with UW researchers and other experts, collaborated on the 2011 Wisconsin Climate Change Impact Report.
We were one of the states that was running out in front in the country in terms of talking about the impacts of climate in the environment.
So we were doing what we were told, and up until 2010, this was one of the highest priorities of the department, to work on climate change adaptation, figure out how we were going to adjust.
But priorities changed when Republicans won majorities in the state assembly and Senate and the governor's office.
When the new administration came in 2011, we were never told to stop.
That year was John Lyon's 26th year as a DNR fish researcher when Wisconsin's new government leaders started to dismantle the world-renowned science program.
It, along with the communications program, were cut on the order of 30 to 50% in a fell swoop. According to the people who actually proposed these cuts, one of the reasons is that they said we were spending too much time working on climate change. And so I think there's a direct relationship there.
Lyon says lawmakers used job cuts to send their unwritten, unspoken message that they wanted climate change and other controversial research stopped.
You know, we're not stupid. We realize that there are things going on, and certainly the work has scaled back dramatically. But to this day, as far as I know, there's nothing in writing, and there's nothing even verbal that says don't do this.
It's a real thorny time and challenging time for DNR staff in the area of climate change, because the governor's, obviously his position is there isn't any, so it's difficult when you work for the governor to turn around and say there is.
I remember being told that we would no longer refer to it as climate change or global warming when the new administration came in, that we would say it was a changing climate, thereby getting away from the human impacts.
As editor of the DNR subscriber-funded Wisconsin Natural Resources magazine, Natasha Kosalki was instrumental in spreading the news about research, including climate change studies being done at the agency.
Was there ever any explanation as to why you can't say climate change, why you can't say global warming, why we're pulling this story?
No, not really. There was never a dialogue. It was more you're being told these are the terms we now use.
In his 2017 state budget, Governor Walker proposed eliminating the long-running magazine as a way to save money, even though it's funded by subscribers, not tax dollars. The legislature saved it, but cut it from 6 to 4 issues a year, with editorial control by the DNR communications director, a political appointee.
The DNR was changing.
Ron Seeley covered the agency as a science reporter for the Wisconsin State Journal from 1978 to 2013.
I don't think there's any argument now that the agency did really clamp down on the discussion of climate change and so forth. I did stories that actually confirmed also that they were denying researchers' requests to go to climate change conferences.
The denials included the DNR removing references and information on climate change from its website.
I don't understand that at all. It's information, and that's what we're supposed to provide. This is what taxpayer dollars go for, to provide the best possible information to people to use.
But Seeley points out that even with a DNR in denial, key state agencies are factoring in climate change as they plan to spend your tax dollars.
Which was ironic because at the same time you have engineers in the Department of Transportation now engineering bridges to take into account climate change.
Climate change references and information were also dropped from the Wisconsin Public Service Commission website. One state agency has actually added climate change language, though. The Wisconsin Division of Emergency Management uses the term climate change on its website and includes a statement acknowledging the human impact. Agency spokesperson Lori Getter says they were directed to do that in their new 5-year preparedness plan by the Federal Emergency Management Agency, but that's the exception to what appears to be the rule in Wisconsin.
If you look at the Department of Natural Resources now, climate science and adaptation and climate change is no longer a priority for the agency. It's disheartening, but I guess it's not surprising.
Jack Sullivan's last years at the DNR were spent watching his world-renowned science team broken up, a staff of more than 100 decimated to little more than a dozen. He says climate change alone wasn't the reason, but it was a factor.
It's pretty upsetting to all of us to see.
George Meyer was Wisconsin DNR secretary from 1993 to 2001, and he says the cuts and culture change at the agency have left it a shell of its former self.
I know from talking to some of those people, they were deeply offended by that, and just, you know, they have to do their job. They can't say anything about it, but they've talked to a lot of other people outside.
Hypothetically, we can continue to work on climate change, but we don't have the staff, we don't have the expertise, and there isn't an incentive for it. In fact, there's an incentive not to do it.
In July of 2017, John Lyons retired early from what he describes as his dream job when DNR administrators decided to move him out of the area where he'd worked for the past 32 years. No current DNR scientists we talked with would agree to an interview on this. It's not just the DNR where climate change has affected public discourse in Wisconsin.
Alleged that I had engaged in an act of theft against the citizens of the state of Wisconsin for speaking the words climate change during work hours.
Tia Nelson is the former executive director of the Board of Commissioners of Public Lands, a state agency that manages a trust fund for public schools that includes some public forest land that generates money. The BCPL website included a description of how climate change was threatening the native trees. The daughter of former Wisconsin governor and Earth Day founder Senator Gaylord Nelson says her belief in climate change almost got her fired in 2015 when newly elected treasurer Matt Adamczyk immediately tried but failed to vote her out. In an email, Adamczyk declined our interview request but wrote, quote, "I don't have any control over climate change in my capacity as state treasurer. For this reason, I am not interested in an interview on this topic." The DNR secretary through all of this, Kathy Stepp, also said no to our interview request. Governor Walker and State Senator Tom Tiffany, who initiated much of the science cuts at the DNR, did not respond to our repeated requests for interviews. But that doesn't mean every Republican denies climate change.
When Governor Walker, got rid of the scientists at the DNR, I think that was a mistake, and I think it's something that we'll pay for in the long run.
Former Republican State Senator Dale Schultz says he is frustrated and disappointed that current GOP leaders have broken with the party's past commitment to the environment and conservation that was solidified by Republicans like Abe Lincoln, who created the National Academy of Sciences, Teddy Roosevelt, who inspired the national park system, and former GOP governors Warren Knowles and Tommy Thompson.
It's clear that Wisconsin is pulling back from its heritage of caring about the land and the environment. I think a lot of it has to do with what I regard as sort of a hostile takeover of the Republican Party by members of the old Conservative Party or American Party, the John Birch Society.
Even though polls show most people do agree with the climate change scientists and their findings, those researchers are being put to the test like never before. Next, their struggle and solutions to the climate change effect. Our climate is changing, and people are curious about why and how they'll be affected.
Yes.
What about all the satellites that we have in our atmosphere?
What the satellites?
Yeah, what damage is that doing to our weather?
The satellites are not impacting our weather in any way directly. They're a beneficial component.
WKOW meteorologist Bob Lindmeier frequently speaks about climate change to groups around southern Wisconsin.
People want answers now. They want to know, oh, so you're talking about climate change. Give me the proof right now.
But even though they have the proof, scientists have struggled to explain it. The effect of climate change in the world of science has been revolutionary, as it's put the scientists themselves under the microscope of public scrutiny. And it's causing the researchers to come out of their labs and into the public arena. Science writer Ron Seeley teaches scientists how to better communicate with people about their research.
The first thing you do is acknowledge their beliefs and understand that they believe differently. That's a real change in acknowledging those differences in values and beliefs, and not diminishing them or not being condescending.
I've learned that I can present the facts. I can't make people change their minds. And that's difficult.
Veteran climate researcher Chris Kucharik says it's in the best interest of science to do a better job of communicating with the public.
It's part of our job, and it's part of the mission, and part of the role as a scientist to do good science, and then also to educate the public on what we know.
Because some of these climate models.
But researchers like the UW's Ben Zuckerberg worry the ongoing discussion is distracting the experts and everyone else from taking the urgent action that's needed to slow climate change's rapid pace.
Every day that we get mired down in discussions where we're not talking about proactive measures to do something about climate change, that's just another day lost in terms of sort of what we can do in terms of mitigating that future impact on our societies and on wildlife populations.
Constantly thinking about climate change and being attacked for the science we're doing can take a real emotional toll on us as scientists, and I see that a lot in our community as well.
Dan Vimont is a professor and researcher of climate science at the University of Wisconsin and has been involved in the work since before the term climate change was being used. He says the public's curiosity turned to criticism when the issue turned political.
We get attacked for results that are inconsistent with what somebody would like to see. And those results are based on our understanding, not based on what we want to happen. I mean, as a climate scientist, I would love it if climate change weren't happening.
Along with the future of the planet, scientists are also concerned about the future of their work.
It really has a chilling effect on certain types of research, certain types of results. People risk their jobs sometimes if they say certain things, even though they know these things to be true. And so things get suppressed, even if it's sort of indirectly.
Our climate is changing, and the solutions aren't cheap, and they only get more expensive as time goes on.
It's absolutely certain that we have to reduce greenhouse gases. We have to decarbonize energy. We have to decrease our release of carbon dioxide and methane into the atmosphere. There is totally no doubt about that, but there are 1,000 pathways to that.
Now, experts agree that a lot can be accomplished by private business and public citizens, but they also concede that it will take governments and their power to enforce environmental laws to make meaningful progress in slowing down the climate change effect.
We need to get serious about this in the next 10 years. So politics needs to really, they need to figure it out because at some point the cost to society will become so large that we'll be spending an exorbitant amount of resources fixing things that we could have done much more efficiently a decade before. And there'll be huge environmental costs, and there'll be social costs to not responding to a changing climate.
And while the experts say it's not too late to take action, it is too late to reverse the damage that's already been done.
If we were to stop today putting all fossil fuel emissions and greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, there's a certain time frame or buildup or sort of residence that's already built into the system. So we'd already be feeling those changes for a number of decades into the future before things in the climate started to level off.
The next 20 years will be a fair amount of change, but it's probably the 60 years after that that we're going to experience dramatic swings in our climate and changes on the globe that people better be prepared for.
Our climate is changing, and as dire as the situation sounds, and is, there is also optimism that history can repeat itself.
Our goal is a decent environment in its broadest and deepest sense.
April 22nd, 1970, the first Earth Day. Founded by Wisconsin U.S. Senator Gaylord Nelson, it inspired 20 million Americans to take action to save their environment. And it worked.
We take for granted today the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act. We take for granted the Environmental Protection Agency, which is there to protect every citizen's right for clean air and clean water. None of these things were the law of the land in 1970. And because of the public's response to this call to action, the environmental decade was launched.
Man has the wherewithal and the knowledge to do it, but they have to have the willpower to go out there and get it done.
If you're not a scientist, there are still lots of ways to get involved in learning about and taking action on climate change. The Citizen Climate Lobby is a way to plug into the politics, and citizen science volunteers are a very important part of the research process. Scientists told me they often rely on volunteers to collect data in the field so they can grow the scope of their studies.
And of course, there are the things we all can and should be doing in our daily lives, like driving less, installing LED light bulbs, putting a rain barrel or two on your house drain pipes, or maybe planting a rain garden to keep those extreme storms from washing everything into our lakes. There is a lot we can all do, and it all does make a difference. This has been Our Wisconsin, The Climate Change Effect. I'm Greg Jeske. Thanks for joining us.